Good afternoon and welcome on this beautiful winter day here in Brookline. My name is Jen Buller and I'm the principal here at the newly renamed Florida Ruffin Ridley School. I am honored to be able to welcome you all to the long-awaited Florida Ruffin Ridley renaming ceremony. Before we get started, I want to share my gratitude for our school-based and district-wide custodians, our Brookline police officers, Betsy Fitzpatrick, Michael Chan, Tyler Volstek, and the staff at Brookline Interactive Group who've been working behind the scenes since early fall to coordinate this event. I also want to acknowledge some of our distinguished guests that are able to be here with us. Massachusetts State Senator Cynthia Cream, Select Board Dr. Raul Fernandez, and Massachusetts State Representative Tommy Vitolo. Thank you all for making time in your busy schedules to be here this afternoon. To all of our speakers and our guests here in person and those of you watching safely at home, thank you for taking the time to be here to mark this historic moment in our school's history. Many of you here and at home had a crucial part in supporting the 2.5-year-long journey that brought us to this moment. You stood up and helped advocate for changing the name. You supported our petitioners and Bee-lievers. You attended one of the renaming public forums. You voted, you listened and learned, and then acted. All of these small actions put together led to a monumental positive change for our community. This renaming was not only important just to our school community, but should serve as a shining example and reminder to the entire town of the good we can all do when we work together in acts of service that make our community a brighter, more loving, and more just place. I know the temperatures are hovering just around freezing out here, but my heart and spirit are so very warm as I reflect on how truly incredible this day is, and I'm filled with gratitude for all the people who made it possible. I want to extend a special thanks to Debra Brown and Anne Greenwald, our brave petitioners who began this process. Debra and Anne, thank you for the gift you have given our school and community. By standing up for what was just and right, you set off a chain reaction that has inspired generations beyond you to engage in public service and the fight for justice. You gave us the opportunity to truly examine who we are as a community, a chance to take a closer look at who and what we uphold, and elevate the stories of so many that have been erased from the pages of our history. What a remarkable day to celebrate this historic process. Today, we have the opportunity to stand here underneath the entrance to our beautiful school building that now bears Florida Ruffin Ridley's name. Let's just breathe that in and be mindful in this space. We are here, not just witnessing, but making history together. This renaming ceremony is both a finish and starting line for our community. It marks the end of the renaming process, a process that not only changed our school name, but a process that changed us all who were involved in our community as a whole. Yet it also signals a beginning, a rebirth for our school community. We now have the opportunity and obligation to fully commit ourselves as educators, as students, and as families to elevate Florida Ruffin Ridley's work and continue forward her legacy and fight for justice. As the cool, crisp air fills our lungs on this wintry February afternoon, my hope is that it'll also breathe new life into our community and invigorate us all to keep a steadfast commitment to working towards equity and justice. I'd like to now introduce and welcome Dr. James Marini, our interim superintendent of the school district this year. Appointed by the school committee in June 2020, Jim joined Brookline after serving a variety of educational leadership roles in neighboring communities. We're very pleased that he can be here today to help us mark this most important occasion for the public schools and the town of Brookline.
Thanks, Jen, and welcome everyone. I'm really honored to be part of this ceremony today. I haven't been a part of Brookline to participate in the process that has gone on, but thanks to Dr. Barbara Brown, I was sent some information I was able to read up on Mrs. Ridley and the process that's happened here. To me, it's amazing. I think about the people who started this whole process with very little, maybe, expectations of where it would go, but persisted and were able to make some changes. This is the way I think about this kind of a change. Changing any name. It's emotional. It cuts across tradition, history, all of that, and raises the whole ire of the community in one way or another until you get the Bee-lievers, the students who did the research. And they researched the names and they researched what these people were all about. And they brought those names forward for the community to be able to ask questions and weigh in on and provide some feedback to. But then I look at the school and I say, what does a school stand for? What does a public school stand for? To me, a public school stands for hope, for the future, for equality, for equal opportunity for people. The very values that Florida stood for. She had the courage, she had the persistence, she had, as it says in that writing, she was a trailblazer for justice. What better symbol could you give to children than when they walk through the school, they see the name of someone who stands for that. She stands for what the future will be for those young children, for the teachers, for the community, for the values, for what Brookline stands for. It is truly emotional for me. I can't believe it. I think it's extraordinary that the town came together to change the name and to celebrate that we are about the future, we are about opportunity, we are about equality, and we're going to show that. So with total congratulations to the people, Mr. Greenwald, Mrs. Brown, who began this effort. They persisted, they had courage, they had the ability to convince others to do the right thing, and the town stood up. For that, it makes me very proud to be a part of the Brookline Public Schools and to be a part of this community. Congratulations. I think this is a major accomplishment for the children. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Marini. Next, I'd like to welcome and introduce Dr. Barbara Brown and Ken Liss. Barbara Brown enjoys both research and community work, especially when they can be combined. She holds a PhD from Boston University, where she worked for many years. In recent years, Dr. Brown researched the history of slavery and freedom in Brookline. The Hidden Brookline Committee was formed to bring that history to the schools and the public. Dr. Brown was glad to be a part of the effort to change our school's name, so it's hardly surprising that Florida Ruffin Ridley is featured on the Hidden Brookline website. Ken Liss is a librarian at Boston University and the volunteer head of the Brookline Historical Society. Ken first learned about Florida Ruffin Ridley in 2012 while researching the earliest African-American property owners in Brookline. He created a poster about her in 2018 for the Historical Society's booth at Brookline Day at Lars Anderson Park, where it came to the attention of the committee soliciting suggestions for a person for whom the school should be named. Ken has continued to do research about the extended Ruffin Ridley family and its long history of activism and advocacy for progressive causes.
Is it okay to take my mask off? I'm free outside. Woo-hoo. Anyway, I am so glad to be here. We are standing at the Florida Ruffin Ridley School. We are also standing on Edward Devotion's land, and we are finally standing on the land of the Massachusetts people who had lived here until the land was taken from them by the colonists in the mid-1600s. We know that Edward Devotion was an enslaver, and if you can't read this from that distance, you can find it on our website. Here is his list of his property at his death. 22 acres, plus the 78 acres he'd already sold away a few years earlier. One Negro valued 30 pounds. One cow valued 14 pounds. And household goods valued 105 pounds. We believe that he had enslaved a man, a healthy young man, given that of the high value that he was listed at. I use the word enslaver and enslaved generally, but not always, to indicate that this was a process, this was a decision, and that the enslaved had a real life, that they weren't just slaves, that they could do things. Devotion in Brookline was not alone. If you look at this map here, everything in blue is a land of enslavers in 1746 at the height of slavery. And there may be a little more land that we're researching now of the other large landowners. All 13, Brookline was not uncommon. Boston was 12% enslaved at that time, and all 13 colonies were slave owning, all of them. So I got a question for you. You can raise your hand. Did you learn in school that there was slavery in all 13 colonies, or are you like me? Raise your hand if you knew it. Oh, sorry, I didn't know it either. No one here learned it in school. And yet we are, there are a couple, yes, there are people who learned it in school. That is part of the change. It is not only the Florida Ruffin Ridley, it is uncovering what had been hidden and what was important and what is important to us. In Brookline, roughly 98 people were enslaved. They were, 2/3 of them were men because the enslavers wanted farmers for their large properties to farm, to raise cattle and fruits and vegetables, some of which went on the international markets of the Caribbean to feed the enslaved people there, because the Caribbean didn't want to spend any land on anything but sugar. There were very few children here. Let me give you a couple of names just to make it personal. There was a man named Titus. The enslavers loved to have classical names because it showed how educated they were. He was enslaved to Thomas Aspinwall. There was several men named Cuff, which is a Ghanaian name, so they kept part of their heritage. There was a girl named Dinah. She was 11 years old when she was brought to Brookline, taken from where I assume her mother had lived, maybe her father, because that was the age at which you were good for work if you were a slave. And then there was a woman, 2 women named Venus, again showing off the owner's classical bent. What slavery meant here in Brookline was it meant wealth to the owners, wealth that got inherited and passed down through generations, and is one of the foundations, not the only one, is one of the foundations of Brookline's wealth. What it meant to be African American or African meant that you were now of a different race. Races didn't exist in West Africa at that time, but race became part of slavery. To the enslaved, they had no right to their bodies. They had no right to where they lived. They had no right to who they could live with. And they were very deeply discouraged from having children. And your body could be inherited by your owner's children. In Brookline and in New England, there were special cruelties if you were a slave that were not seen in the South. There was an extraordinary level of loneliness and of heartache and of isolation. Think of it, twice as many men as women, and the men are all competing for the attention of the women. There was jealousy, there was violence, and yet so many of them lived alone, the only enslaved person in a family. Of the children who lived here in Brookline, over half of the children who had lived here died before the age of 9. Over the half of the children. And yet, enslaved people persevered. They lived and they resisted humiliation. One story from Brookline is of a man named Primus, owned by John Heath. John Heath had a friend over and they were joking around with Primus. And so John Heath said to Primus, "Hey, Primus, which is heavier, a pound of lead or a pound of feathers?" Well, Primus fell for that old joke and said, "Well, a pound of feathers." And the two men laughed and laughed at him. And when they had stopped, Primus quietly said, he probably joked so that the sting would not be there, and said, "Now, master, if you put your head inside the chimney, which would you rather have fall on you?" He kept his dignity and he refused to be humiliated. We also have two teenage boys, 16 and 17, who took their freedom, who escaped from Brookline even when there was nowhere else to go. They probably went on ships to get offshore. So we have African Americans of enormous courage and resilience who lived here. And my final question is to you and to me. Through Florida Ruffin Ridley, together with the students, we've stopped honoring Edward devotion with a school. We have restored justice by naming this school after a descendant of enslaved people. My question is, how shall we decide to respond to the enslavement of 90 people here in Brookline, to the growth of wealth here in Brookline by the whites, and to the descendants and their descendants of the enslaved people, all of whom were injured by white supremacy? My question really is a desire to bind up the wounds and to make all of us whole again. Thank you.
In my job as a librarian at Boston University, I work a lot with undergraduate students, teaching them how to do research. And I try to convey to them that the most interesting research is finding stories that aren't well told and telling them. And that's certainly been true of my own work as a librarian and my own work as the head of the Brookline Historical Society, often coming upon stories by accident, as was the case with Florida Ruffin Ridley. I wasn't looking for her. I was working off of a comment that somebody made about somebody else being the first African-American homeowner in Brookline. And I wondered if that was true, and it wasn't. And that led me to Florida. I've done a lot of research on her, as has Barbara. We exchange a lot of information, and I just want to share with you a little bit of the story of Florida Ruffin Ridley. Florida Ruffin Ridley, her husband Ulysses, and their young daughter Constance moved to Brookline in 1894 when they bought a newly constructed house on Kent Street. It's still standing today next to what was then the railroad tracks and are now the tracks of the Riverside or D branch of the Green Line. They were probably, we can't be certain, the first African Americans to own property in Brookline. That was just 2 years after the opening of the first school on the site, named in 1892 after the former slaveholder, Edward Devotion. So we are replacing the name of someone who considered Black people to be property with the name of someone who may have been the first African American to own their own property in Brookline. Florida Ruffin was born in Boston in 1861, just 2 months after the election of Abraham Lincoln and 3 months before the start of the Civil War that ended slavery in the United States. Her parents, George Lewis Ruffin and Josephine St Pierre-Ruffin, were distinguished and accomplished members of Boston's African American community. George Ruffin, born in a free Black family in Richmond, Virginia, was the first Black graduate of Harvard Law School, the first Black judge in Massachusetts, and the first Black member of the Boston Common Council, a predecessor of sorts of today's City Council. Josephine St Pierre-Ruffin, Born in Boston, was an activist, a writer, a publisher, and an all-around force for the rights of African Americans and women, especially after the death of her husband in 1886. In 1890, she founded and edited The Women's Era, the first newspaper published by and for African American women. Florida Ruffin followed in her parents' footsteps as an activist and a pioneer. She was educated at the Boston Normal School, later called Boston Teachers College, and Boston University. In 1881, she became the second African-American woman to teach in the Boston Public Schools, though she was forced to resign after marrying the tailor Ulysses Ridley in 1888. Married women were not allowed to teach in the Boston schools, while the married men were. The Ridleys moved to Atlanta, Georgia for 3 years, where they worked to establish kindergartens in the South. After returning to Boston, Florida worked closely with her mother. She became the co-editor of and a regular contributor to the Women's Era newspaper. She helped found the Women's Era Club, an organization focused on the rights of women of all backgrounds. We, the women of the Women's Era Club, she wrote, entered the field to work hand in hand with women, generally for humanity and humanity's interest, not the Negro alone, but the Chinese, the Hawaiian, the Russian Jew. The oppressed everywhere are subjects for our consideration, not the needs of the colored women, but women everywhere are our interests. In 1895, the year after she moved to Brookline, she helped organize the first National Conference of Black Women in the United States, bringing more than 100 women from clubs all over the United States to Boston. The organization they formed, the Federation of Afro-American Women, later merged with the Colored Women's League to form the National Association of Colored Women. The motto of the organization was "Lifting as we climb." They advocated for women's rights and aimed to uplift and improve the status of African Americans. She fought against lynching through her writing and speeches, including criticism of some suffragists who avoided the topic out of fear of losing the support of Southern women in their fight for the right to vote. In Brookline, she was an active member of the Equal Suffrage Association and a co-founder of the Second Unitarian Church on Sewell Avenue in the building that is now Temple Sinai. In addition to her advocacy, she was a writer of short stories that portrayed African-American characters and the issues they faced. She was an amateur historian who helped found the Society of Descendants of Early American Negroes. She knew that telling stories not just for the past, but for the present and for the future. She gave voice to people whose voices were not often heard. Today, as we officially place Florida Ruffin Ridley's name on this Brookline school, we are honoring her memory and her work, but we are also honoring all of those people for whom things are not often named. Florida Ruffin Ridley would be very proud of that, and everyone involved in the renaming of this school should take pride in their efforts and in the Florida Ruffin Ridley School.
Thank you, Dr. Brown and Mr. Liss. Next, I would like to welcome and introduce Debra Brown and Anne Greenwald. Ms. Brown is an attorney for the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Her position is in the Regional Counsel's Office in the Office of Civil Rights. Prior to this position, she managed the region's Resource Conservation Recovery Act and Emergency Planning Community Right to Know Act, Clean Air Act 112R, tribal and federal facility enforcement and compliance programs. She has served in numerous capacities during her 30-year tenure at EPA. She has managed its enforcement office, the regional laboratory, and the region's toxic and pesticide enforcement program. In addition to managing the programs described above, Ms. Brown was Vice President for Brownfield's Pilots and Council with the Institute for Responsible Management, while on leave from EPA for 2 years. While at IRM, she also co-authored a book on brownfields. Prior to her EPA employment, Ms. Brown was Director of Equal Opportunity Employment for the New York Transit Authority, Counsel for the Texas Department of Agriculture, and an Assistant to the Governor of Texas. Anne Greenwald is a town meeting member in Precinct 8. She is the mother of 2 children who graduated from the now Florida Ruffin Ridley School. She also works as an RN who has worked as a school nurse in the Boston Public Schools and has worked on racial and economic justice and immigrants' rights issues in Brookline and Boston for many years. Please welcome our brave petitioners.
need the step stool. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so honored to be here today to celebrate this historic event, naming the school for Florida Ruffin Ridley. Last month, I attended an event at the Florida Ruffin Ridley School, which warmed my heart and validated our original vision of why a school name is so important. The students shared poetry and visual art that they had made about what Florida Ruffin Ridley meant to them. They heard the story of her life and work. They understood her life in the context of the time she lived in. The students, parents, and teachers were so proud of their school name. Now I'll tell you the story of how this all began. In the fall of 2017, I read an article in Boston Magazine that mentioned Edward Devotion had been an enslaver. I had very strong attachments to the Edward Devotion School. My children attended the school. I had been a PTO president, and my husband taught there. I felt so many things when I learned this information about Edward Devotion. In contrast to the current students at the Florida Ruffin Ridley School, my family and I knew nothing about Edward Devotion. I felt remiss that I had not thought to find out about him. I felt upset that his name graced this great school. I also felt a spark of excitement. The school was being rebuilt into an amazing new structure that you see here today. And I thought, wouldn't this be a perfect time for a new name too? I inquired a bit, but I did not know how to go about changing the name. Then in January 2018, I met Debra Brown. She had also been pursuing how to change the name of the school through traditional channels without getting any response. She finally wrote a letter to the tab about changing the school name that I had read. I wanted to meet her. Luckily, she was looking for allies through the Workers' Circle, and I was a member there, and they connected us. From there, our friendship was born. We've been getting into good trouble together ever since. Since none of the formal channels had responded to Debra, we decided to bring a warrant article to town meeting. This would get people's attention. The original warrant article to remove the Devotion name was submitted. We explicitly stated we wanted to acknowledge the history of enslavement in Brookline and to redress the wrongs it had caused. I don't think I quite understood the significance of this at this time. We were launching a campaign to educate our town on the history of enslavement in Brookline. The information was already out there, but people weren't paying attention to it. From March to May 2018, we had a lot of work to do. I had naively thought that this would be something our liberal town of Brookline would embrace and be happy about. Early on and throughout the whole process, we encountered attacks on our character, misinformation, and attempts to get us to drop the warrant article. Fortunately, some supportive town meeting members and school committee members helped Committees were overwhelmed because presentations and through them. I think we rattled some feathers by submitting a citizen warrant article. We also contacted the press. Their coverage brought public attention to the campaign. The school committee hearings were critical. They decided to form a subcommittee on school names to look at the names of all the schools. This work is not yet done. Parents who felt nervous to speak in public came forth and spoke to why they wanted their child's school's name to be named for someone they could admire and respect. We asked that the school department be responsible for a process of student and community engagement in choosing a new name. Our hope was that they would use the town naming criteria, the school's core values, and a restorative justice lens when they chose the new name. Many people were won over in the months leading to town meeting. People initially against changing the name were especially brave to examine their feelings and fears and be willing to take a stand, not to erase history, but to expand our understanding of history. The Rename Devo team had many conversations with individuals. We did a lot of listening. We won people over one by one. As town meeting approached, the momentum in our favor was building. In fact, the warrant article passed by an overwhelming majority. The school was given the temporary name of the Coolidge Corner School until a permanent name was chosen. So the summer of fall of 2018 were spent working with many invested parties to develop a plan for a student-led search for a new name. The student committee was formed and was up and running in winter 2019. Plans were made for community input all along the way. There's much more to tell about the opposition we faced in approving the final name. We all worked together, held our ground, and kept our eyes on the goal of naming the school for someone whose life we could be proud of. I'm delighted Florida Ruffin Ridley was chosen. I will let the students tell the story from here. I want to thank everyone for their involvement in this project. Every one of you contributed to the pursuit of justice in Brookline. And now you will hear from Debra Brown. Thank you so much.
This is me being nervous. You know, when we started this process, I would venture a guess that half the Bee-lievers would have needed this stool. And now as I'm looking, not at them, but up at them, you know, it all just warms my heart. But thank you, Anne. Thank you for the kind introduction and the background information. This is indeed a special day for the Florida Ruffin Ridley School family, for Brookline, and I'm going to be bold enough to say for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. You know, this is a formal dedication built on, you know, an acknowledgement of her many social, political, and intellectual contributions to us. Change is never easy and seldom welcome, but so many of you helped to move the school's renaming from an idea to this loving gathering, despite a pandemic. As Martin Luther King said, change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability, but comes through continuous struggle. And so we must straighten our backs and work for our freedom. A man can't ride you unless your back is bent. And so our backs were straight and the work began. By way of background, there were a substantial number of Brookline residents who were afraid or unwilling to consider the name change. I mean, I heard things like, he only had one slave, you know, he didn't treat the slave that badly. But who would utter those words today? Who from Brookline? Far fewer than did 3 years ago. I honestly thought that the renaming would be easy, as Anne said, that anyone would be able to see that renaming a school after an enslaver was wrong. This naive assumption was met with a great deal of hostility, derision, fear, and anxiety. Also, why would we even subject ourselves to such negativity and advocate for a school change? I mean, I had no kids in the school. I've never had a child in school in Brookline. I just live 4 or 5 blocks from here. As I stated 3 years ago, we did it for the children who attend this school now and who will attend it in the future. A legacy of slavery may be an easily identifiable yoke on the backs of African American children, but it spares no one. And injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Another Martin Luther King quote. Every child has to carry such a burden, and it's just patently unfair, and it's painful. We could do better, and we did. So since then, I've actually seen more young people as well as people of color assert needing a place at the decision-making table. They want not only to be heard and understood, but to see change. And everybody here has helped to make an important Brookline institution, its schools, stronger by taking a risk in a town unaccustomed to risk-taking as well as change. Many of you brought a special encouragement to me, and I thank you for that. I also want to acknowledge that you helped me to be more of a risk taker and be more dedicated to economic, social, and the political well-being of all Brookline's residents, especially those who have been chronically excluded from the town's benefits. I hope that our collective dedication to justice buoys us all to perform other concrete acts for racial justice, equity, and fairness. At this point, I'd like to thank some early and key supporters of the name change. I am truly inspired by the many people who helped us achieve such a significant name change. I am especially grateful for the contributions made by Principals Buller and Ola. Thank you. You know, every time I mention the Bee-lievers, I start crying. And I'm going to digress from my written speech because I want to say that I was afraid for them for the longest time because the negativity was just so strong. But these young people and their parents, they came with a gift and they shared it. And so I thank you. I really thank you. But I knew the tide had shifted when I was at Farmers Market one Thursday afternoon, and some kindergartners ran up to a table I was attending and they said, I know who Florida Ruffin Ridley is. And they proceeded to tell the parents, and you could see the parents actually change. But I have some special gratitudes as well. Susan Wolf-Ditkoff was the first townwide elected official to say, wait, we can't name a school after an enslaver. And she helped us in ways that other people looked away from us. I mean, it wasn't like they were saying, we don't know what to do. They looked away from us. And so I will be forever grateful for that support. Ruth Kaplan, an alumnus of the former Devotion School, stood up and denounced the name of the school, enslavement, and advocated for a name change, and then defended naming the school after Florida Ruffin Ridley. I want to thank Joanna Baker, First Parish, for giving us a place to organize, Maya Norton and her children, Anna Kassaran and her family, Hadassah Margulies and her family, the PTO, in particular, Erin Meyer and Lauren Bernard, Abby Erdman and Bridge, Arthur Conquest, the school subcommittee on school names, sorry. Katha Seidman, Andrew Bott, Dr. Raul Fernandez, Malcolm Cawthorn, Jean Thompson Grove, Carrie Grove, Kathy Fisher Muller, for looking at the issue through an educator's lens. David Pollack, who told me more than once not to worry, this was going to happen. My family and friends, and a special thank you to Anne Greenwald, who has been my dear friend, support, and ally, and an affirming soul through all of this. We would not be here without her many substantial contributions. So I'm honored to be standing here today to celebrate the renaming and to commit to carrying on Florida Ruffin Ridley's legacy of freedom and bondage from bondage and access to reason and kindness. So let us continue. Let us march on until our work is done. So thank you all.
Thank you, Deborah and Ann. Next, I'd like to welcome and introduce school committee member Susan Wolf-Ditkoff. Susan joined the school committee in 2008. In that time, she has chaired the school committee, the curriculum subcommittee, finance subcommittee, BHS building committee, Driscoll building committee, and the district's task force on reopening. Susan has children in elementary, middle, and BHS. She is currently at the Harvard Divinity School researching and writing about the ethics of wealth and charity. Please welcome Ms. Wolf-Ditkoff.
And it was the struggle, the pitched battle between remembering and forgetting that became the device of the narrative Beloved. The effort to both remember and not know became the structure of the text. Nobody in the book can bear too long to dwell on the past. Nobody can avoid it. Toni Morrison. I'm going to try to do this without crying. Such an amazing day. Symbols matter. And believe it or not, 3+ years ago, we were actually debating that in this town. There were many who said, why do we need to do this? Renaming a school is just a symbol. It's a fig leaf. It won't end racism. We have better things to think about. To which we responded, yes, it's a symbol. Yes, it won't end racism. But also, yes, it matters and it needs to happen. Who we honor matters. So I'm tasked with describing the process, which Ann did a terrific job with. But the process started 4 years ago, involved more than 200 public meetings and input and debate from more than 500 residents. So it would take me about 5 hours to describe the process, not 5 minutes, and it's chilly. So if you're interested in the 5-hour version, we do have archived more than 10,000 words of description and documents and video of the process if you're interested in learning more. But I'll try to give the quick version. So the winter of 2018, Debra Brown and Ann Greenwald drafted a warrant article to rename the school. They began with help from a very small group, Dr. Barbara Brown, Maya Norton, Joanna Baker, many others who were early adopters mentioned earlier. And over the spring, it built up momentum. And by May of 2018, Town Meeting overwhelmingly voted to support Warrant Article 23, that the Edward Devotion School needed to be renamed. Mind you, it took more than 6 months of really hard work just to get to the point where we agreed as a town to rename the school. So the good news, we voted yes. The bad news is we didn't actually get to agreement on a new name. So it was the Coolidge Corner School for a while. And that cloud had a silver lining because we then had a full 1.5 years to digest and process and even grow a little bit as a community through really hard conversations. Now, we already had 2 committees in town, not 1, but 2, charged with renaming activities, but they were both really genuinely struggling with how to proceed on this unprecedented task. Never done anything like this before. So that summer of 2018, we got a few folks together in a bit of a skunkworks renaming advisory working group, because there are already 2 committees, to design a process for picking a new name. And even the process to design the process really was wonderful. It became so much more inclusionary as we rolled it out. Led by former Superintendent Andrew Bott, it included the petitioners, Debra and Ann, under the incredible leadership of Jen Beller and Saeed Ola, who are just, we have so much gratitude for. A few of us school committee members and a racially diverse group of community leaders and parents to figure out how to do this. There were many meetings, but we decided that the renaming was a historic opportunity to catalyze education and discussions of anti-racism and reckon with the history of slavery in Brookline that Hidden Brookline and Ken Liss and Barbara Brown have done so much to raise to us. But the key feature was the role of students at the center of the vetting process. Now, candidly, we got a lot of pushback on centering students. Students won't know enough. This is unfair to put on them. They'll be in the crossfire. They'll be scapegoated. My favorite quote was, "This is going to be a PR nightmare for the school committee if you screw this up." And that was from one of our allies. One person used the phrase, "We're going to be brainwashing our youth." That person was not an ally. But this is Brookline, and while it may not be conventional for students to play such a significant role in an important town decision-making process, we were confident that with the right adult support, Jen and Saeed, a group of committed students would be able to participate fully in a process that would be inclusive, open, and thorough. Involving students in critical decisions like this about their school reflects a core value of ours in Brookline, our educational mission, which is fostering meaningful student engagement in their learning and developing joy and skills and knowledge to learn and participate thoughtfully in a democracy. All right, fast forward, November 2018, the student process began. Very diverse, incredible group of individuals, some of whom you'll meet in a few minutes. Between December and January of 2019 then, the community submitted 119 unique names from 250 submissions after a massive PR blitz to try to get as many names in as possible. Between January and April 2019, the students reviewed them all, and I hope they'll talk about it a little bit, but they did use the town's naming criteria in their analysis, the school's core values, as Anne said, and the values of restorative justice, as intended by town meeting's original vote. Now, those criteria we also had a process about, but this is important. The bar was not perfection. The bar was not, is not, and should not be a perfect honoree. We looked for balance because no one is perfect. But we also knew that we could do and honor someone better, much, much better. And better than that, we could reclaim history and restore an individual like Florida Ruffin Ridley to their rightful place in that history. The students were incredible. You'll hear from them in a minute, and their parents and guardians, some of whom are here, were so supportive and absolutely essential through the process. They came up with their own name, Bee-lievers in Change. They split into groups. They reviewed all the submissions, all the community comments, researched the candidates, made their own recommendations, prepared incredible background research, slides, posters, just this incredible, incredible body of work that is a gift to all of us and a learning for all of us. By March of 2019, in April, they were ready to go public with 15 finalists. They led 3 renaming nights in April. There was a beautiful gallery walk in the auditorium upstairs, posters in town hall, something at the library, an exhibit. There were traveling show to different buildings, school buildings, and we received more than 250 feedback forms from community members. Now this is a new 250, not the old 250. We like our process here. So fast forward to June of 2019, and we held more hearings, and the students did an amazing job presenting their case, and ultimately the school committee approved their name. Now, lest you think that it was smooth sailing at this point, finally in November, Article 26 was proposed to rename the Coolidge Corner School to Florida Ruffin Ridley. However, even after all this, the end was not a foregone conclusion. We have other much beloved people in town, Ethel Weiss, Bob Sperber, many others who are worthy of tremendous, tremendous honor. And as it happened, competing warrant articles were filed against the students' process. I'm not giving you the glossy brochure here. This is the real story. And a little known fact, an open meeting law complaint was filed against the district with the Massachusetts Attorney General's office, alleging that the student-led committee was illegal and that we hadn't had a public process. Like I said, we kept persevering. The kids did an incredible job at town meeting. They lined the hallways in Brookline High School with beautiful posters, so much educational material. And ultimately, the vote at the end of the day was something like 195 to 15. And it was an incredible, incredible evening. Now, so why did we go through all this, right? Why is this important? Because naming a school is the highest honor a town can bestow on an individual. It merits a higher standard than anything else any other public spaces, a street, for example. And here's why. Adults can freely choose to live on a street or not, but we legally require our children to attend school. We ask them to assume the identity of the namesake into their very own identity. We ask a 5-year-old child to say, I'm a proud student of the Edward Devotion School. And we ask them to root for devotion on the soccer field and shout Devo Pride at math league tournaments. So this isn't about a school's name. We're talking about the core identity of our children. And when the person is a Black child, and the person that they're being told to honor and be proud of, is someone who took people who looked like them and enslaved them, you better believe that names matter and symbols matter. And as Debra said so beautifully, we know this is damaging to all children, not just African-American children, white children, other children of color. To honor someone like that on a regular basis, it affects them, it affects us all. So a higher standard is needed. And I too want to thank and name the many, many graduates of the former Edward Devotion School, some of whom still live right across the street, who did have pride in that name and who did the really hard work of rethinking their own experience. Those who testified publicly that they loved their elementary school, they loved their experience, their school, but that the name had to go. And their unlearning is a model for all of us. Because this renaming, this reclaiming, this re-honoring is an important step. It's symbolic, but it's important, it's real. Because there are some things that once you see them, you can't unsee them. Once you see them, you can't unsee them, which means we as a community had to do this. In the words of Keynes, which some of you know, when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do? No single action will end racism in this town or this country, but if we didn't act, then we became the people who knew better, and who did not act. We became part of the story. By not acting, we would have been acting, because inaction is action. And I'm so proud of this town that it acted. Thank you for your support.
Thank you, Susan. I now have the absolute pleasure and honor to introduce 4 of our Believers of Change: Hannah Salini, Gareth Jones, Liv Fawitter, and Emery Shendi Ruiz.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. I'm Hannah Salini, an 8th grader. When the renaming process first started, I was a 6th grader, and I had previously heard about the proposal for a new school name. Me and around 15 other students were on a committee to help choose a name. We poured a lot of our energy and time into finding a name that would inspire current and future students to work for what they believe in. The Believers received 119 different nominations, and we researched each individual name to see if they fit the criteria as a school name. We as a group would meet every Wednesday to narrow down the nominees to 15. Together we decided that it would be important for us to take into consideration people who are not well known, so that we could share their stories and contributions they made. Once the name Florida Ruffin Ridley was chosen, we were presented with another difficulty. Members of the community didn't agree with our decision, but we believed that Florida Ruffin Ridley was a great influential person to name our school after. Despite the backlash, we persisted and spoke at Town Hall, where later Florida Ruffin Ridley was officially chosen to be the name. During this 2.5-year-long process, we worked with and learned from many adults. Debra Brown and Anne Greenwald were the ones to initially propose that the name of the school be changed, and they supported us and helped us throughout the entire process. We are also thankful for the help from Maya Norton and Dr. Barbara Brown, who helped prepare us for Town Hall and educated us more about slavery. Finally, our principal and vice principal, Jen Buller and Saeed Ola, supported us and helped us throughout the entire process. We were very grateful for this help, but we as students carried this process forward. We wrote our own speeches for all the meetings, and we were the ones to choose the semi-finalists and the finalists based off of the town's votes. Us students changed the name, but the process changed me too. I've always felt a lot of negativity from the students and the community towards the name change, but I still knew that it was the right thing to do. This made me realize that I have to stand up for what I believe in, even when others don't agree with me or aren't on my side. Learning about Florida Ruffin Ridley and her story about standing up for the things she believed in inspired me to do the same. Now when I see a problem, I don't want to wait for other people to solve it because I know that I can try and solve it too. From Florida, I learned that no matter how hard something is, we should still try our hardest to do what we think is best. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. So, my name is Gareth Jones. I am a sophomore at Brookline High School. It is hard to believe that we have been working on this necessary to change the name. It was only just one slave. And it infuriated me that people would say something like that, that owning even one other living person as property wasn't a big deal. I heard about the committee from my mother first, and I immediately knew that I needed to help somehow. I originally walked into the Believers in Change room thinking, how can we come together? And how can we change this school for the better? I will admit it, the first few meetings were chaotic, filled with what seemed like 1,000 voices at once. Probably the teachers down the hall could hear the screaming. We didn't know each other much back then. We didn't know who the other people in the room with us were. However, that quickly changed. We slowly began to organize ourselves, meticulously thinking out a way for the public to voice their opinions as well. By the end of my 8th grade year, I felt as if I had made strong friendships in this group. We truly bonded over this historic experience, and we became a team. As Helen Keller once said, alone, we can do so little. Together, we can do so much. And nothing quite tested our teamwork and resilience than talking and participating in the Brookline Town Meeting. We got tons of backlash from town members saying that our process was deeply flawed, faltered, and really corrupt. That we had excluded names for the sole reason that they were white. We were told that adults had screened out names from the nominations. It angered me that people would even suggest we dismiss candidates for the color of their skin. It irritated me that it was said we were controlled by adults in any way. We carefully considered every name and in a democratic process narrowed them down ourselves. Though I was somewhat disappointed in some of the backlash we received, I hope by the end we could convince them that Florida Ruffin Ridley was more than worthy of the school's name. The backlash and all the criticism we received, the strong support of people as well, had a profound effect on me. I think it made me realize how not black and white this town is. It does have its blemishes. Edward Devotion stole a man's life, and he was still considered an honorable past Brookline resident until just recently. I think this process opened my eyes. I think it opened our eyes. There have been countless instances of racism and other issues around the US for ages, especially now. However, I believe it's the small events, that brief blow of wind that can help start the larger storm of justice. This renaming here is a small but powerful step in the right direction. Me and my colleagues, we had to work hard to get here. We persevered throughout all of our hardships, the backlash, standing up for ourselves against the sea of adult opposition. But now, it's up to all of us. It's up to you. It's up to me. It's up to all of us to make sure this important step in our own community can lead onward to a galloping sprint for equity and greater understanding everywhere. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Liv Clowder. I am a sixth grader here at the Ruffin Ridley School. Edward Devotion stole a man's life. How wrong? Like Gareth said, when people use that argument that it was only one slave, it made me so sad. That one slave was a human being, just like you and me. If he or she had been born in our time, they could have been my friend or your colleague. That was the biggest reason I wanted to be on the committee. I heard about the slave and I knew it was wrong. The name needed to be changed so we weren't honoring someone who had stolen another person's life. The naming committee gave me that opportunity to have a say in making a better future. When the school committee chose Florida Ruffin Ridley, I knew it was right. I could see how she would become an amazing example for FRR students, how she would inspire generations of students to come. Throughout her life, Florida Ruffin Ridley collected and preserved African American stories. She became a role model for us Bee-lievers. We saw her as a valuable and important person whose life story had faded into the background, like so many other stories of women and Black people of her time. We chose to uplift her story. We had an opportunity and we took it. The Bee-lievers stood up to the backlash and retaliation of others in our community because we knew our cause was right. And look, we've come out the other side with Florida Ruffin Ridley mounted on the side of our school. Can't you already see how our community is changing for the better? There is still more to go, but we are moving forwards. Already, our community has become more inclusive and more aware of uplifting untold stories in underrepresented groups. This is the right step in the right direction. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Emery Shanduriz, and I've been a part of the renaming committee since I was a 7th grader, and now I'm a freshman at BHS. Sometimes I ask myself, how did I get here today? When I first applied to be a part of the group, all I knew was that I wanted to be involved in the history of bringing justice to the way we ignored all of Edward Devotion's wrongs. A man who owned another human being, a slave owner. It's not right to walk into a school, especially for people of color like me, and think of all the violence and crimes the school's namesake must have thought were the right things. I took it as an obligation to my heritage to be involved in this process. And even before we began narrowing down the names, I wanted to think of what it'd be like to come back here in 20 years or so, see the name printed above the door, and think, we did that. Not only did we choose a qualified candidate, but a Black woman who was a teacher, an educator, and a Brookline resident. She also fought for the rights of oppressed people, for women's suffrage, and against lynching. Florida Ruffin Ridley is a woman who deserves to be honored, and I will always be grateful for all the time I sacrificed to make that happen. What we did here hasn't been done before locally. There's not a single other school in Brookline that's named after a person of color. And this is a change long overdue. But just because it's only happening now, doesn't mean that now is the last time it'll happen. This change symbolizes a new wave of equality in our community and in the world. Of course, it's obvious with white supremacists storming the Capitol less than 2 months ago that this name change didn't just end all of racism. It's a small but powerful step forward in our community to be able to acknowledge this need for correction. And there are still so many problems left in the world, big and small. Climate change, poverty, In case it's not obvious, we have a global pandemic going on right now. But I want you to think about something that you want to see change in the world. How does it anger you? How much do you believe this problem has to be fixed? One of the main things that can hold people back from achieving goals like this is fear, and that's perfectly normal. Let me tell you that at the various town hall meetings and the times we were keynote speakers at a convention, there wasn't a single time that I would stand up and my hands weren't shaking a little bit. Having every adult in the room staring at me, waiting for me to start speaking, was nothing short of momentarily heart-stopping. Those who agreed with me and those who didn't. But the message I needed to convey was stronger than any of their stares. Now I'm telling you, the students of the Florida Ruffin Ridley School and communities across the world, we may experience bad things throughout our lifetimes in the world, but we're the ones who have the potential to fix them. It's just a matter of how badly we want it. Fight for what you believe in, no matter how badly those hands are shaking. Thank you.
All right, I'm talking one more time. Okay. Changing our school name has given all of the Bee-lievers opportunities we would have never dreamed of. Because of the renaming, we have all opened our eyes to the injustices in our world. Every day, they just keep building up. Anger that goes so quickly to violence. Neighbors turning on each other. On January 6th, hateful events to demolish our country's democracy. But ever since the renaming of our school, when I hear and read about our current world, I don't start with feeling sad. I start by thinking how I can make a difference, how we all can make a difference. Because when we changed the school name, I realized that I could make a change in our world. It's hard to change one injustice and not start seeing all the other injustices we can change. We accomplished the renaming of our school, but we are not done. This will not be the last you hear of me, or frankly, any of us. We will not stop here. We know how inspiring Florida Ruffin Ridley is. This isn't the end. This is just the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you, Bee-lievers. Each time you speak, I find myself humbled and inspired by your words and actions. And I agree with Liv. This is surely not the last time we will hear from these kids. I want to now introduce Saeed Ola, our beloved grade 6 to 8 vice principal. We saved the coldest part of the ceremony just for you. Saeed Ola has been a member of the Public Schools of Brookline since 2007. His time in Brookline started with the METCO program, where he worked as an instructional aide, providing supplemental support to students, their families, and teachers in grades K to 8 at both the John D. Runkle School and the Michael Driscoll School. Mr. Ola then joined the Runkle School staff on a full-time basis as a member of the middle school team, teaching math and social studies in grades 6 and 7. While at Runkle, Mr. Ola served in a number of extracurricular capacities, including a member of the Runkle Child Study Team, a member of the Runkle School Council, and as a coach of the grades 5 and 6 math league team. Currently, Mr. Ola serves as the middle school vice principal here at Florida Ruffin Ridley School. His work primarily centers on supporting students, teachers, and families in their efforts to build student capacity and awareness as they grow to become more independent and reflective learners. Mr. Ola holds a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and Black Studies from Swarthmore College, a Master's of Arts in Teaching from Simmons College, now Simmons University, and a Master of Education in Organizational Management from Endicott College. Please welcome Mr. Saeed Ola.
Thank you, Jen. Every time I hear the Bee-lievers speak, I think to myself, I would hate to be the person who has to follow them. Be careful what you put into the world. I would like to start first by echoing Jen's acknowledgement and thanks to all of you for spending your Friday afternoon with us as we celebrate the renaming of our school. I also want to thank all of those whose efforts helped make this event happen. Special thanks goes to Massachusetts State Senator Cynthia Cream, Brookline Select Board Member Raul Fernandez, and Massachusetts State Representative Tommy Fotolo. Thank you all for making the time to join us today. Last but definitely not least, I want to say thank you to Debra Brown and Greenwald and all of the students who are part of the Believers of Change, as we would not be here if it wasn't for their hard work, dedication, and perseverance. They were given the deceptively simple task of selecting a new name for our school. But as you heard today, completing this task was neither quick nor easy. Over the years, this group experienced many ups and downs, many celebrations and minor setbacks, and also moments of doubt directed towards them, the process, and the product. We gather here today to celebrate the culmination of their work and reflect upon the lessons learned that impact us collectively and individually. Rather than enumerate these lessons, I will let the words of our previous speakers remain resonant in our minds, memories, and hearts. Our celebration today reminds us that we can impact our community, we can improve our community, and we must engage our community. As community members, this is our right and our responsibility. While we sit here today, whether in person or virtually, and applaud our efforts, let us not rest on our laurels. The work is not yet done. We must continue to engage in the back and forth of discussion and debate, being ever mindful not to fall into the abyss of unresolvable discord. Discussion and debate is at the center of continuous improvement. We cannot get better or be better without this. We must hone this skill and pass it on to future generations. We owe this to them, as it is our mission as educators to ensure that every child develops the skills and knowledge to pursue a productive and fulfilling life, to participate thoughtfully in democracy, and succeed in a diverse and evolving global society. If those words sound familiar, that is the mission statement of the Brookline Public Schools. Again, thank you for joining us today on this joyous occasion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ola. Today was certainly a day filled with reflection, joy, and celebration of this historic accomplishment in our school's and town's history. Let this be a launching pad, a springboard, and a call for all our citizens and community members to commit to coming together and lifting every voice and story in our work for a more just and equitable society. In the words of Ms. Ruffin Ridley, all we ask for is justice, not mercy or palliation, simple justice. Surely that is not too much for loyal citizens to demand. Thank you for being a part of today's ceremony, whether you're here with us in person or at home watching, and we look forward to when we can all safely be together again and hopefully soon celebrate as a whole community. Have a good rest of your day.